We're so excited to be here today for the conclusion of the COM26 UN SDG Goals Indigenous Summit, here to look at how we can create a better future together for the planet and for all of its wonderful people and creatures. I'm honored here today to introduce you to Marianne Thompson-Frank, who is an Indigenous activist, a sculptor, and a philanthropist, just a wonderful human being, and Athena Wolf, a curandera and healer working with the Indigenous peoples and with their with the wonderful history and technologies of the past and the future for healing for ourselves and for our planet. I was really honored to host with Eugene Braverock and to speak each day at this conference. One of the things that we're looking at as we proceed to create a better future is how do we learn from the past, learn from our ancestors, and keep those traditions alive and bring them to new life. So with Eugene Braverock, I've been working on a project, it's just in its infancy, but it's to bring the Native American stories and languages together and Indigenous peoples all around the world to record their languages and stories of the elders and to incorporate the young people in each of these cultures to help bring those traditions and languages together and to record them and archive them. So that's a part of what we're working on together. Now I'd love to open it up and to talk to Athena Wolf about curandera and the healing work that she's been doing.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to be here with you today to discuss the philosophy, history, and techniques of curanderismo, a healing tradition common to North and South America and other countries as well. Before I do that, I thought I'd tell you something about my teachers. I studied in Tecate, Mexico, with the medicine man of the Yaquis, Huayramecachara, also with the Peruvian shamanic lineage with Alberto Villoldo, Ginger Lee, and I also practiced Ayurveda, which is actually the indigenous healing system of the Nagamaya in India. So I studied with Dr. Sham, Dr. Vasant Lad, and Yogi Bhajan. I lived in an ashram for 26 years studying this fairly complex system of healing. Shall I go on? I'm happy to talk about the philosophy of curanderismo.
Yes, yes, if you could share a little bit about that and a little bit about the history of curanderismo as well.
Okay. We are of the same body as other people, animals, fish, stone, minerals, plants, the earth, and all life in the universe. This body is a manifestation of spirit. Illness occurs when a person does not live in balance with all of these aspects of self. The curandera sees illness in this framework and has the knowledge to guide the client back into balance. Balance can be achieved with help from the Great Spirit. And of course, the Great Spirit has many names. From nature, by releasing old wounds, eliminating curses or entities draining energy from a person, diet, plant medicines, and by making restitution and changes. So if we contrast that understanding with the current paradigm of drugs, surgery, radiation, in 2015, the total number of individual prescription medications filled at pharmacies was just over 4 billion. That's about 13 prescriptions for every man, woman, and child in the United States. The drug overdose, that's according to the 2015 census. It's now more than that. The CDC says that in the United States, drug overdose death rates have more than tripled since 1990. and every day more than 100 people die from drug overdoses. Of course, in my healing practice, I treat chronic disease, so I see many people who have suffered the adverse effects from the drugs and surgery that they thought would help them. Then, of course, we have pollution of the environment with the pharmaceutical drugs and their metabolites. That reaches all of the aquatic environment, the groundwater, the rivers, the lakes, and the oceans through the wastewater. So the advantage of natural therapies such as Ayurveda and curanderismo is that these therapies do not pollute the waters of the earth.
Can you share some techniques used for healing in curandismo?
Sure. So there are techniques that are traditional, yes, that many people know about, and these are given through the different types of curanderas. For instance, the sobaderas are those who give massages. The yerberas are experts in herbs, and parteras are midwives. Oracionistas are those who pray for healing. They pray with their clients for healing. And of course, there's the traditional illnesses that go along with this. For instance, bilis is an illness that's brought about by excessive and prolonged anger and fear. When someone is in this condition, the curanderas or the curanderos say that excessive bitter bile flows into the person's system, causing him or her to become tense and irritable, lose appetite. And of course, it's a liver problem. People don't often think that liver problems are caused by not just what we eat, but also our attitudes in life. Other traditional illnesses that have been treated for thousands of years are susto. The vernacular for susto is PTSD. Susto is caused by trauma, extreme trauma, like being in a car accident, losing a loved one, being in a war. I've had clients who were physically tortured. Sexual abuse is a very common, unfortunately, very common cause of susto in this culture. There's other traditional diseases that are treated, such as empacho, envidia, mal puesto, mal de ojo. These have to do with sort of the evil eye, jealousy. But besides, to treat these traditional and chronic illnesses, we use the techniques called limpia. You know limpia? I'm sure Marianne does. It's cleansing. Yes, the limpia is an energetic cleansing. For susto, which is the trauma, we do soul retrievals. And the soul retrievals bring back the fragmented parts of the soul. Because when someone has an extreme trauma, very often that person will say, I can't be here for this. I can't be here. And in fact, you set your intent like that. And it's a self-defense mechanism. There's nothing wrong with it. You set your intent, I cannot be here. A part of the soul leaves so that that part of you doesn't experience that. And so the soul retrieval brings back that fragmented part of yourself because the person begins to feel numb, like they're not all there. And of course, they're not. So that's a very healing thing for people with susto.
Athena, can we look at the larger society as a whole? I know that a lot of your work is also to do with healing in communities and healing the earth. And when you're speaking about someone not being fully there, I feel that as a community, as a global network of humans, in some ways we're all numb, and we're not fully experiencing, we're not fully able to have empathy for others or to connect fully with others. Do you see a connection there, and is there a way in which curandismo can help in that aspect?
Yes, there is, because these indigenous cultures have long traditions of healing society and healing the earth. I teach, as you know, a school for healers. This is our 7th or 8th year, called the Escuela de Curanderismo, where the apprentices learn how to heal the earth with certain ceremonies. Also, how to heal the communities. So we do this with despacho, with the waka. For instance, I'll give you one example of healing that I did in our community. There was this group of wonderful teenage people in the charter school in our area who were going, the school, I think, had rented a plane for them, and they were going to do some environmental work. Well, a big wind came up just about a couple miles from where we are now, and it crashed the plane. Everyone in the plane died, including the pilot. So afterwards, a few members of the community came to me and asked if I could help heal that area, because, and I hadn't known this, there had been 9 people who died on that spot. And there was nothing on the actual spot. There was a subdivision there, but where the plane crashed, it was just desert. So I took a few of my apprentices with me, and we did ceremony there. We found the area where there was a really strong negative force that was like pulling energy in. And one of the people in that community said she felt she was somehow involved with it. So I did a soul retrieval with her to get rid of the imprint of that past error. And then we all went to that spot, and we found that there was an entity there, and we sent it away. I'm sorry, that was a rather long story. I wanted to give you a concrete example of how we healed something that was very detrimental in our community.
Thank you, Athena, for sharing that. As a filmmaker myself, I think that we have taken the traditions and rituals that come from these ancient lineages, and in our modern world, we create films to in many ways help people to also to experience catharsis. It's sort of a common ritual that we share, but we don't think about it in those terms. And I think that learning about the ancient ways can be very grounding and be extremely powerful to allow new mythologies to be created and new positive energies that we can unite the world with and work together to solve its problems. I thank you so much, Athena. I'd love to jump now to Marianne and to hear about all the wonderful work that you're doing. I know you're an incredible sculptor and artist, and I'll just let you.
Thank you so much, Andrani. Yes, well, my husband Joshua and I established, along with a friend of ours, Cook Buchanan, what's called the Mimosine Institute. And within our organization, we are focused on helping the world handle the challenges of globalization in a responsible manner. And that sounds very broad, but then when you start bringing it down to what it means and the process of addressing that economically, environmentally, looking at interfaith relations, looking at all these different things that, because people talk about globalization in economic terms, but they very rarely talk about it in sociological, in terms of psychological, in terms of the sheer diversity, spiritual. There's so many other ways in which are growing and inevitably tangling up with each other in terms of our cultures is not going to affect the way each of us lives on a day-to-day basis. And depending on where you began economically in that process, it's going to determine what that in reality is for you. And one of the voices in that equation, because we actually created a process called socioacupuncture that we use to, I guess you could say, diagnose an area. Because what we realized is a lot of different people think of things in silos, but an long sustainable solution is never in a silo. One thing you think might be environmental, but there's a cultural influence that's out right there. And then as you try and handle and work with that, then you find out, oh, the way the arts are being interpreted here becomes a valuable tool to addressing this. So somebody that began with a economic or environmental thing will sometimes suddenly go, wait a minute, how is that related? And then through this process, they realize, oh, it is related. And if you can plan for the whole, you have something that will last. But the reason I share all this is because when we started doing our work, one of the voices that we really realized as we diagnosed that was always missing, truly, I won't even say almost always, it was consistently always missing, was the Indigenous people's voices. And so often they were the ones that understood what the challenges of an area geographically were. I mean, you look at all these fires people talk about, and if you talk to our Native American friends, Isaac Kinney, for example, of the Yurok tribe, over in California, he will tell you, or Louis Hina of the Tasuki tribe down in Mexico, they would tell you that they had traditions in which they would set fire to fields in controlled ways. And yes, involve prayers, but by doing it, it prevented, these huge fires that we see. Similarly, you have the Huma tribe, my friend Pat Arnold from the Huma tribe down in Louisiana, and she would tell you about how they had traditions in which there would be like a cylinder, and they'd go pray, and it was always the teenager's job to go over to the edge of the ocean, measure from a particular inlet, and if the water was over a certain notch, this teenager had to go and explain it to an elder, and the elder would tell them what to do. Well, it turned out they did this. Yes, it involved incantations. Yes, it involved ritual, but where they measured warned them to get out of the way of Hurricane Katrina, so their entire tribe survived it. And the story, and a lot of people also like to look at Indigenous people as ancient, so yes, there's ancient, but you have people like Louis Hina and Pat Arnold who have become, really outspoken people for the environment. They both have their doctorates, they're both, biology. And what Louis tried to explain when he was with the EPA and Pat Arnold from the Huma tribe called was, yes, this is a ritual, but this is also a science. Because Indigenous people have a science, a metaphysical component, and a cultural component, and it all kind of blends in. So one of the challenges I think that we found in the MIMSI Institute is how to help Indigenous people communicate that to the larger world. Because especially when we start talking about the environment, it was so easy at the time for the EPA to just dismiss them. Oh, that's some ancient mumbo jumbo from some Native American tradition. Whereas when Louis was there, he said, you don't understand. They have been in that one spot for thousands and thousands of years. If they say run, evacuate, everyone should be paying attention. And don't dismiss it because there's tradition and ritual. There is a science within that. And a similar work that we've done with the Tolteca tribe. We were brought into the De Young Museum, and the De Young Museum had said, oh, these people don't exist anymore. But when we brought the Tolteca in, they started describing a particular mosaic. This is what this means. That's what that means. And they started revealing there was Fibonacci mathematical sequence within it. There was traditional medicine, just basically recipes within it. And then there was the mythology. And it was showing that the way we were studying things from a Western point of view was such a small sliver of that reality. But when you start bringing in the mathematical principles and you brought in, and you see the science, you start realizing that there is a relationship between those. And the mythos that a lot of the Indigenous traditions share is how you discover how those things are interconnected. So the closest that you might come from the Western world be Carl Jung, I guess, but really it's so much more in depth. And I think that right now, for example, and that example with the De Young Museum, they knew so much that the De Young Museum led the push to say we were wrong. These people actually exist. And that changed things in basic pragmatic ways, human rights, the ability for the Tolteca to say to the country of Mexico, you care so much. You say you care about Indigenous people, but you're not giving us access to these pyramids or giving us access to be able to speak about our concerns with the environment, how it's affecting us, et cetera, et cetera. So, the reason why I also wanted to bring that example up is that there's so many different times where you have a people in the Western world that's trying to make a decision, and they're just thinking, oh, we're just going to write they don't exist. When you look over and you see Indigenous people around the world that say, well, maybe, we don't exist in terms of the way the history and archaeology and anthropology are telling it, but they actually have a long history that is still rooted where they are. So that's other work that we do. Between that, we have 2 cultural centers in Mexico, one for the Tolteca people at Teotihuacan, one for the Maya people in the Yucatan. We have an international chapter in Japan where we have the indigenous Shinto people a part of that and lead that effort. And we also have a chapter in Israel and Palestine. Our work right now with the Master for Life effort is getting KN95 Master as many Native American groups within, communities within the Americas, from all the way from Alaska down to South America. A lot of our other work involves bringing in scientists, environmentalists, social activists, et cetera, together. And many times when we come to a challenge that community brings to our attention, we're not coming in there with the intention of focusing on Indigenous voices. But what we have found is that that's always consistently one that is lacking, that we're always bringing to the table to talk about a wider topic. So I hope that gives you kind of an encapsulation of some of what we're doing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so exciting.
It sounds like you have a worldwide effort. We have a small nonprofit that we just started a year ago called Quetzalcoatl. And through that, we have 3 properties and a large greenhouse. We're growing medicinal plants of the Maya and the Naga Maya, and we're giving the seeds to low-income communities with the knowledge of how to grow and use them so that people can be empowered to heal themselves.
Wonderful.
That's really beautiful. It's very exciting to see you 2 wonderful, powerful women creating positive change in the world and creating that physically creating seeds for the future in so many different ways. It's very exciting and necessary for not just talking about the problems, but actually helping to create the solutions. I'm working on a project called Open Origin, which is a carbon neutral eco-industrial park of the future. And it's a cooperative led by Indigenous people with the goal of creating sustainable, self-contained industrial ecosystems, bringing economic empowerment to Native tribes and serving as a model for future projects. It's creating a circular economy node, one that has net zero emissions. And one of the challenges I think that we don't often discuss is the lack of opportunity for peoples that have been historically excluded from being able to borrow money and be able to engage in the economic benefits of their own land. So that's something that I'm working on as well. I think that as an artist, I've always focused on telling the stories and trying to encourage people to find their own abilities and overcome challenges, and by seeing those who've gone before us and learning from them, and also through fictional stories where we create new mythologies for the future. And I've come to realize that storytelling is very powerful, but so is actually doing things and creating the ways that and structures for change. So I'm thrilled to be looking at both sides of these equations with both of you, wonderful humans. I know today the focus is on creating the blueprint of the future. So I thought I would love to close with asking each of you, what you see as important, the most important aspects for the future, ways in which you're working to create change. And before I open it back up to you, I'm going to mention one more project that I'm working on. I do a lot of work against trafficking, human trafficking and sex trafficking. And that's an area in which the Indigenous communities have been extremely impacted. There are a lot of very vulnerable women a lot of murders that are unaccounted for. And I've spent my life doing a lot of work for women's empowerment and fighting trafficking. And part of that was inspired by my own experiences as a child with my best friend, who was a Native American young girl who was murdered in Toronto, Canada, and the lack of any police real efforts to bring her murderer to justice. And that inspired me to realize that that we all have to work together and fight to create the structures that keep people safe, and also to empower women to come together and to create the protections that are needed and their own strengths. So I'm working with a nonprofit called Saving Jane, which is doing wonderful work in this area and is helping to rehabilitate women who've been trafficked as well. So lots of ways that I think we need to look at the past and heal from the terrible things that have happened, and also create structures for the future so that we can protect and engage with each other in a positive way.
You
Athena?
are a blessing on this good earth, Indrani.
Oh, thank you,
And
Athena. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Athena, about the future, what your hopes are, and how you think people can best help create that blueprint for a positive future.
well, it is my prayer and my intent that I will help spread respect for nature and for women. And that's what's lacking in our world, is the respect for women, and especially women's voices. What will heal our world is women speaking the truth. I have so many clients who have so many women clients whose throat chakra is blocked because they've been told to be quiet or be nice. And working from the individual basis to that respect for all women and our ability to connect intuitively with the truth and speak it is really important for healing our world. So the blueprint for our future I'm projecting is, and I'm acting on, of course, is increasing that respect for all of our relations. And that includes the balance of nature. Where we live now, people have been trying and have mostly succeeded to kill all of the timber wolves in the area, because the cattle ranchers are taking over all of the public lands. And they said, we don't need wolves here. We need a big pasture for our lands. So there needs to be a knowledge of how the ecosystem functions well in balance, so that we don't kill off bees, so that the drugs and chemicals don't kill off all the beneficial insects that are needed, as well as the wildlife that are part of this ecosystem, that are part of us.
So when you speak about our relations, you're speaking about all of our relations, right? The animals, the insects.
The two-legged, the four-legged, the plant people, those who fly, who swim, who crawl, and the stone people, the record keepers. These are all of our relations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Athena, for sharing that. And Marianne, I'd love to hear your thoughts for the future and what you hope for.
Well, thank you. Well, what I'd like to do is, by starting and sharing this, this is from the Toltec tradition of Teotihuacan, and I want to recognize one of my teachers, Valois Kempintukutli. Took me years to be able to say that, but he's one of the spiritual leaders of the Toltec people. And the reason why I wanted to share this, it's actually where they burn Kapal, is that in the tradition, if you can imagine this figure being in the middle of a mountain, like an island on one side, and then water underneath it. The idea is that the human being is constantly in balance. And one of the things, I'll try and hold this closer, you'll see one hand is like this and the other one is down. And the reason is they're showing that when you're like this, you're receiving everything. You're receiving energy, you're taking. When you're like this, you're putting back. And so when they meditate, they believe in doing that, because they said otherwise, and my like many spiritual teachers, mine has a great sense of humor. And he says, people come from all over the world to see the pyramids, and then they come and they go, bah! and they just leave your your negative energy here. They're like, cleanse me, great, and they go. And he said, his people go back in, they're clearing the energy every day after that because of all the chores. He said, because people don't think about that. And I started really thinking about, what does that mean in terms of our pragmatic day-to-day life? Many of us are like, me, 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 me. You go on social media, it's my life, my career, what's happened, me, me, me. And it's very seldom, the difference of like putting back. It's like, okay, I'm receiving this, what am I putting here? And recognizing that we're constantly needing to find this balance. And not only do we need to find it, but we need to really understand where things are right now. Just financially in the world, if you look and you see how much money is needed for an issue, it's huge. And then if you go in and you say, okay, well, the people that are working on it, all the money in the world that's in certain nonprofits and that are addressing that issue, and in countries, this much. Where's the majority of the money in the world? The majority of the money in the world is all in private institutions, corporations, our investing. So when you start looking at it that way, you realize financially we can't even address the world's problems unless we start moving that flow and getting more into that balance. Simply, there will not be enough there. So, as a humanitarian, yes, I work with the Museum Institute. I also work with social responsible investing. It's very easy to get caught up in the romanticism of Indigenous people. And I feel very blessed that I've spent since I was 15 studying with the Tolteca. And that helped me. Yes, there's a deep, beautiful metaphysical aspect that has changed my life, and I will continue studying. And the experiences are wilder than anything you might have read about, and it's amazing. But in the process of that, on the way to the pyramids, to have an incredible engaging experience, I've seen Toltec get arrested because they were not allowed to go pray in their house of worship. That's a human rights issue. I've seen I've seen Hopi, who are related to the Tolteca. I've seen the Hopi and the Navajo, which are like, the Hopi are like the donut hole, the Navajo are the donut geographically. Seeing how their water has been, destroyed, how it has arsenic and uranium in it. And so, I could go over there and think, oh, how neat. I feel great about myself. Let me take my photo with, the tourism industry. I can go and buy jewelry. I can go and meditate on a mountain and do this amalgam of new age stuff and little hints of their stuff. I mean, this is what's really happening in the world, this exploitation of the culture. And yet, maybe I can look the other way and not care if they have arsenic in their water and not care if they have urine. So the reason I'm sharing these examples is I could go down the list of amazing cultures, the Maori, the Shinto, other people in Africa, different cultures around the world, and they're all beautiful. But when people are only looking at the romanticized metaphysical part, and they're not seeing like the missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is an organization I support, which deals with sex trafficking. They're not looking at this. They're not looking at, like at Standing Rock, how the water protectors were not just protecting, the water of that, but they were protecting water that is like a vein going through the United States that were affecting major cities. And they're not realizing they're not just protecting, they're protecting water for everybody. And metaphorically, that is what Indigenous people, and also literally, are doing around the world right now. They're often, if you throw a stone in water, you have rings coming out. They're often that first culture that is bumping into the realities of what we're causing, whether we're dealing it economically or whether we're doing it environmentally. They're often the ones that get dumped on, get land stolen, get trod on. And so if I'm looking at a future, and I'm talking about it just from the Indigenous perspective, actually, if I'm talking about it from a worldwide perspective, we need their voices. We need the voices of people like the Huma tribe that could know their land so intimately. They knew if water went above this line, that they would need to run. That's an intimacy with the environment. How many people today do we know have intimacy with the environment? Here in Dallas, I noticed when the monarchs are no longer, coming in right on time, and that they're staying all the way through January. And I know that while I love seeing them, that's a signal for something that's unhealthy. If you really know your environment, you don't have to be told by the scientists, you start noticing, okay, something's off. And as a species, we need to bring that back into our consciousness. A lot of people from, left brains want to kind of rinse it off thought of consciousness. But I would say that what we're having in the world today is a crisis of consciousness, because that comes from the ability to have empathy. And when I say that, I'm not saying agreement. I'm not saying that I have to agree 100% with somebody. I'm saying that even if I disagree 100% with someone, I need the capacity to be able to look out of their eyes, because that's how we start addressing these world's problems. And a lot of the traditions with Indigenous people, they have the tradition of listening, truly being. Our wonderful friend Athena was talking about PTSD, something that was happening here in Dallas several years ago. Ross Perot had a passion for veterans, and he had research that proved, all these psychologists over time, that those that were Native American were getting through their PTSD in a healthier rate than others. And he said, why is that? So they sent all these psychologists and psychiatrists to go and see what they did. And they realized the veterans were allowed to come back. They weren't put on a pedestal. They weren't smile and be proud of it. They were just put in a circle, and the community sat in a circle and were quiet and allowed them to say everything. If they had to kill a child in the middle of the war, not because they wanted to, but that was haunting them. They didn't have to keep that horrible event inside. They spoke about the ugliness of war. They spoke about decisions that made them basically whatever haunted them at night. And the community received it without judgment and saw it. And that process next followed by going into the sweat lodges, where they would literally sweat out all of the anger, the angst, with the help of the traditional medicine man, who would sit there and work with them as a partner through the process. After they had the sweats, then they would come in and they would work with him, sometimes for 3 years. But what they found is that process was so powerful that Ross Perot ended up bringing in people into Dallas. He brought in they ended up working with people that were not Indigenous and going through similar processes. And ultimately, many of them didn't have to have prescriptions. They're able to get back their normal lives back. It wasn't a cure for all, but it was such a marked improvement. So the reason I'm sharing these things is because whether you're dealing with an environmental crisis, and like with the Huma, or you're dealing with something that's showing a psychological process, there is so much knowledge that the Indigenous people can provide our world as we begin to heal. But the most important one of all, in my opinion, again, goes back to learning to live in balance, because right now we are completely out of balance. We don't think about our responsibility to the world. We don't think about where we're rooted in the ground and how we're responsible to that part of it. And we don't think about our position in the whole. If we're investing, are we doing it in a way that's hurting somewhere else? If I'm buying something, am I buying something from slave labor, or can I use my money in a way to encourage better practices? We can go on and on, but again, it always comes down to a crisis of consciousness. And the Indigenous traditions that I've been blessed to meet from pretty much all continents, they all come back to one thing: knowing that you are part of the whole. And when you say me includes the world, the two-legged, the winged, the four-legged, and every other human being. And if we can get to that, like in your tradition, when people say namaste, how do we come from a position of, it's not even a conscious effort to be respectful to another human being or to a piece of the earth or to an animal. What it is enough to be respectful to yourself, because they are of yourself. To hurt them would be to hurt yourself. That's the change in mentality that I think will save our world. And any programs that we do, from how we invest to how we educate to how we function in a society to help get our mindset that way, is what I feel is absolutely imperative for our species to just survive, but eventually, hopefully, thrive on this earth.
Wow, thank you so much.
I love what you said about doing the limpia on the temples, to clear the temples. That's so beautiful. I have a great honor and respect for the culture of the Mexica. It's inspired me, and I've learned so much from it. And I hope to pass that on to others.
Absolutely, same here. It is a privilege to learn what you're doing. And for a lot of the viewers, I think it's also very beautiful and appropriate to say that there's so many different paths, and the Curandera path is such a beautiful one because there are a lot of people that don't know their personal tradition in terms of the Native American tribes. And many curanderas have been offering practices to allow someone that feels their soul calling to them, but they don't know, if they don't know if they're Otomi, they don't know, if they're, what they have no idea what their heritage is. Tolteca, Azteca, Zapoteca, they have no idea. But through curandera, they find a way to answer that beautiful call to their soul and their abilities. Because most of us that do healing, I think we would agree, you're called to it. You don't choose it. Sometimes you resist it, and it shoves its way in.
No, I did. It's not something that I wanted to do. And for the past couple of decades, I talked a little bit about the traditional diseases and ways of healing, but I heal chronic disease of today. I don't do empacho, invidia too much. I help people heal with natural therapies from heart disease, anemia, cancer, herpes, all kinds of viruses, bacterial infections. We have more complex diseases today than I think people used to. So, and of course, Ayurveda has this very long history of multi-therapies that you use everything together. There's a diet specific for different constitutions. It's not the Western idea of one diet fits all. There's all the massage techniques, the saunas. Reflexology came from Ayurveda. And of course, reflexology is used in curanderismo as well.
And it's such a privilege to know that these things exist, because I think a lot of times people dismiss, just the complexity and the science behind it. When you describe that, I'm sure in your practices, and for the benefit of those watching, I'll say just in my work with the Tolteca and Hopi and Maya alone, I've seen things that most people would consider miracles. You can see a wound that is split open to where there's bone, and then the skin just literally close up. People that have had breast cancer that have had lumps that slowly come out because of the application of mud over time. And I mean, there's things that I've seen. A brain tumor that was supposed to kill a friend of mine, Gregory Gomez, a beautiful man. The VA operated on the wrong part of his brain, and then they said, "Whoops, well, you're going to die because we can't do another brain surgery within this time. We took out the wrong part." And I brought him to the Hopi, and they did. They showed him this tradition, and it was basically an alcohol based with herbs and everything. He washed himself with it and did all the other things he was supposed to do. Within 8 months, he was walking into his neurosurgeon's appointment, and then the guy was shocked. He said, "I just made an appointment to be polite to you, but I thought you'd be dead by now." And he couldn't believe it, that the tumor had shrunk so much that they were able to operate and save his life. These things do exist. And
they do.
My
daughter was in Standing Rock with the water protectors. She was there at the worst time when the planes were going over, spraying people with poison. Shortly after that, she got a brain tumor. And she has healed from that. Actually, the brain tumor was growing out of her forehead. Yeah, she was quite ill. She wasn't able to get out of bed or anything. She healed from that brain tumor using only the therapies of Ayurveda, the Naga Maya, and of curanderismo, the Maya. It took her some months, but she did all the therapies and she healed. And God bless all of the other water protectors who were also damaged, injured, and imprisoned for their stand in protecting our water.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that people may not see, that those from indigenous traditions see, is there's a very pragmatic metaphor in terms of what we're doing with the earth and what we're doing with ourselves and each other. And just as we need to, as I was talking about the balance, keep our own bodies clean. And I'm not talking about being a Puritan, but just what we surround ourselves with. Most of my friends that were up there at Standing Rock, Joshua and I were up there just in the, as food and stuff was being delivered that we were overseeing. But we met people that were there the whole time, and they all have what they call standing rock cough. And I mean, so much for people don't realize that chemicals and all sorts of crap was used on them. And when we realize this is what we're doing to our own people, our own citizens, our own species, our own veterans that were up there, all these different people. And, and the irony is that they were defending things for us. They were trying to prevent us from doing that to ourselves, to the water that feeds a ton of our country. And so, sometimes I would meet somebody that was from one of those major cities that the water was eventually going into, and they say, well, what's the big deal about that? I said, well, if you want to turn your water on tonight and know you're safe, it's a big deal for you. So, but when we see what what people are doing there, that's why I think it's so important. Yes, it's a cleaning like you're talking about, but it's also, how do we take that mentality to the world? And again, finding that balance. The body does echo what we're doing emotionally and spiritually with ourselves. And if that's true, then there's also the understanding of a mass sharing of, I guess you could say, we talk about a cosmic consciousness, but we often don't talk about a cosmic unconsciousness. And during this time, there's a massive cosmic unconsciousness shared by humanity. And this is where I will get a bit metaphysical, and I hope that's okay here. But in the traditions that I've been blessed to study, I see this time as a time where our intentions and our consciousness literally is changing into reality at a much faster rate. I've witnessed this in many practical, pragmatic things that I do and the work that we do. But because of that, if people are not aware of how we're each individually contributing to that shared consciousness that's the evolving humanity, whatever you want to call that, and for many people watching this will be Christians. So I would say in your tradition, Teilhard de Chardin's idea of the new sphere, that shared consciousness, that's what he called the cosmic Christ. In the Toltec tradition, we talk about the Quetzalcoatl returning and unifying with the Quetzalcoatl. There's so many different versions of that around the world. But the point behind that is that it's only by embracing that understanding of unity with each other and with our responsibility to the whole that we can hope to evolve.
You're right.
Thank you
Well,
so much.
Well, we thank everybody.
The Great Spirit has thousands of names.
And we thank you all for coming and being a part of the COM26V and for sharing yourselves. And Johnny, thank you, and Ms. Wolf and Ms. Thompson for the amazing work that you're doing. And we can't wait to include all of your work in the blueprint.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you.